Wouldn't it be nice if everyone always got along and communication was always agreeable? Well, of course, that is a fantasy that will never happen. And while there are some that enjoy a good argument and seem to relish stirring up discussion about difficult subjects, that does not describe most people. It's more likely that you'd rather run in the other direction than be part of a confrontation. Psychologists tell us that the fear of confrontation is one of the most common fears that people have. Well, today on Discover the Word, in our study of Paul's New Testament letter to the Galatians, Paul tells about a time when he couldn't avoid a confrontation with another heavyweight of the early Christian church, the Apostle Peter. What was this about, and how did it turn out? We'll pull a chair up with the group and find out as we discover the Word next. And welcome to Discover the Word, the weekday small group Bible study from Our Daily Bread Ministries with your study partners, Mark D. Hahn, Elisa Morgan, Bill Crowder, and Daniel Ryan Day. And right now, this group is working its way through the New Testament book of Galatians in a 6-week series called It's All About Grace. Now, we're in the middle of week 2 today and discovering that going through a book of the Bible like this really does help us understand the context and helps us digest the message that the writer, in this case the Apostle Paul, was trying to get across. And in this letter to the Galatians, we've discovered that a conflict is at the foundation of why this letter was written. And it addresses a perversion of the gospel that, in reality, we continue to struggle with to this day. And it was the source of a big-time confrontation involving 2 pillars of the early church. Paul refers to it in Galatians chapter 2. And so let's listen. Bill?
Okay, the other day we were talking about conflict versus cooperation, and we were talking about just not liking conflict.
I was talking about that, yes.
Yes. Well, I didn't want to single you out. I didn't want to create any conflict. What about confrontation?
Yeah, what's the difference?
If I had to define it, I would say conflict tends to be two-sided and confrontation tends to be more one-sided, where one person's going after another person.
I don't like confrontation, even though I see the value in it, especially in the business world. No matter how prepared I am, no matter how much I know that what I'm saying is what's in the best interest of them in the business, I do not like the conversation still.
But, if you don't do it, or even the motivation to have confrontation arises from internal conflict.
Yep.
I'm not comfortable with what's going on here. I'm in conflict with something. I need to address it. It's interesting that one leads to the other and then to more of the other.
Right. Is there a way of confronting that is gentle, that is thoughtful, that is kind?
Sure.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times it comes down to, at the beginning, am I having this conversation with this person because I want what's best for them, and I want to shape this conversation so it's what's best for them? Or am I having this conversation because I'm annoyed at something they did and I want them to know that, or that I'm bothered by them or something?
I think one of the dirty little secrets of leadership is that you're put in a position of having to do confrontational things from time to time. And it really is hard to keep your own heart in check when those moments come. People who are in leadership aren't the only ones. Parents, teachers, sometimes children. I mean, when you're in a situation where a child has to confront their parents over something, I mean, none of these situations are comfortable, even when we go at it with our best intents to try to help and to try to nurture and to try to really not just correct, but to protect, because we see outcomes down the road if this behavior is left unchecked. Confrontation is hard, and sometimes it's necessary because of the impact it'll have on an individual, the individual you have to confront. Sometimes it's hard because you're having to confront them about the influence that they can have on others.
Even though we try to mitigate it or minimize it by doing it privately or doing it gently, you're saying there's still the potential for...
There's the potential for misunderstanding. There's the potential for an angry reaction.
Or for a power shift to happen.
So there's a lot of things about this that feed into awkwardness. And I want us to kind of have that discomfort very present with us as we read Galatians 2, verses 11 through 13. Elisa, can you read those?
Of course. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in this hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray.
Now, at least your translation says Cephas. Bill, you're talking about Peter.
Yeah,
Thank
same
you.
person.
Same person.
Yeah.
Why does he go back and forth in what he calls them throughout the letter?
I don't know. One is a Greek name and one is an Aramaic name, but they're both speaking about the same person.
Okay.
In the previous little vignette, Paul travels to Jerusalem, and he is in submission to the leadership of the church, and everybody's in agreement on the message, and everybody's in agreement on the mission, and everybody's in agreement on the value of the poor. Now the geography is switched. Now Peter has come to Antioch, where it's a largely Gentile church. And in a largely Gentile context, when Peter shows up, when in Antioch, do as the Antiochans do. He's right there with them.
So he was not kosher at that point.
No, he wasn't being kosher until kosher people showed up. And then all of a sudden, his behavior changes. Now, do you see why Paul's upset about this?
He's concerned about the implications, right? Peter's almost giving into the idea that we have to live like Jewish people according to our culture.
The very things that he had not been requiring in Jerusalem, when Judaizers show up in Antioch, he sides with them.
Which could probably raise questions in the Gentiles.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And that's why Paul feels so strongly that he has to confront this with Peter. Read again verse 13. How did this affect Barnabas?
The other Jews joined him in this hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray.
And it's probably confused, or we actually clarified this by seeing that the Judaizers, these Jewish men, had come up with the argument that if you're going to believe in Jesus, don't forget about Moses. Don't forget about the rules.
That's right.
Don't forget about our Jewishness.
And that's the whole problem that they're battling with now in Galatia. And what Paul's doing is he's giving these folks in Galatia a test case. Here's how easy it is to stumble into this. The same Peter who endorsed the gospel that I was preaching, the same Peter who was preaching the same message to the circumcised that I was to them, that same Peter. Look how easy it is to slide into this performance thing.
And then Barnabas as
Yeah,
well.
Barnabas.
So it wasn't just a matter of wrong behavior. Look at the influence that he was having on the other Jews. You almost hear the pain in Paul's voice. Even Barnabas, my mentor, the guy who had helped me when nobody would help me.
How do you feel about the fact that Paul does this publicly?
I don't think he does this publicly. I think when it
Well,
says
he ended up
he-
writing about it.
That's the larger point. I think that's the point where it becomes a shame-honor contest. In an Eastern culture, things are rooted in the community. And if you wanted to discuss something privately for the sake of settling issues and so forth, you would do it privately. And the example of that is Nicodemus coming to Jesus by night, right? He's not coming to challenge Jesus. He's not coming to confront Jesus. He's coming because he wants to know. And so he comes privately. When the religious leaders in Jerusalem confront Jesus, it's always publicly because they're trying to break down his credibility. And what I would say is right here, Paul is confronting Peter privately. He opposed him to his face because of his hypocrisy, because he's saying, listen, man, this is not what we're about. We're not about law. We're not about Moses. We're not about kosher. We're about grace.
But he does include this in a letter that's going to be read.
Yeah.
And maybe you're suggesting that by the time that happens, his confrontation of Peter done in private is resolved.
Yeah, we believe all of this is before the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 when all these things got sorted out. But who has he been citing in this? He's been citing James and he's been citing Peter. And when the Jerusalem Council comes, it's going to be Peter who argues for grace, not law. And it's going to be James who gives the verdict.
What I want to believe is that by the time the letter is read around, Peter has already bought in. He's already agreed. He's saying, you know what, Paul, I blew it.
Right. It sounds really raw when we're reading it.
Yeah.
But I also hear some echoes in the Gospels. The disciples were willing to let these stories go out of them looking really foolish. I mean, there's some stories of
Great
Peter in the Gospels that are not flattering to him, but it's there.
And you know what? We do it among ourselves. it's almost a privilege to be able to admit the stupid things we've done in the past.
Yeah.
Now that we've bought in to something far better.
Because
you know?
it's all about grace.
Yeah,
And so
right.
our mistakes really lift up
Right.
grace and
But
its
that's
power.
also what makes it so hard to confront someone else. Because we know we have our own backlog of mistakes.
Yeah.
But here, what's at risk is worth the difficulty that Paul's willing to wade into. Because what's at risk is how the people at Antioch first, and then Galatia second, understand the gospel.
But I think it also speaks to that humility that all of us have. The best confrontation is always rooted in our understanding of where we fall short. It doesn't mean that we minimize what the other person has done, right? That would be unclear. They need to know, okay, what I did was wrong. And that needs to be very clear in our
That's
communication.
a great point, Daniel.
But the perspective from which we come, and oftentimes the best conversation happens when I go, Bill, look, I'm speaking to this from experience, man. I've made the same mistakes. Or I've made similar mistakes. And we've already seen Paul do that. In chapter 1, he admits, I persecuted the church.
Yeah.
I've done this.
Yeah.
So he's not holding himself up as the guy that has it all together, and then he opposes Peter. So in the same way, when we end up in these situations, we can look at one another and go, look, I've made some of these same mistakes, or I've made similar mistakes. This is how God transformed my heart. I see this in what you're doing. It's got to change. God's grace is sufficient for you. His power is made perfect in this weakness that we're talking about. He loves you, but it has to change.
And I think the more that is at stake, the more important it is that, as Paul would write later in Galatians, that when we correct a brother who's overtaken in a fault, that we do it with a spirit of gentleness, lest we ourselves also fall into the trap. Paul's trying to help Peter out of the trap.
And that's grace.
That's grace.
Yeah, confronting someone rarely is an easy thing to do, but there are times when we need to speak up and help one of our brothers or sisters in Christ to see clearly what's at stake. All right, you're listening to Discover the Word with Marty Hahn, Elisa Morgan, Bill Crowder, and Daniel Ryan Day. And we are studying Galatians chapter 2 together this week as part of our 6-week series going through this entire New Testament letter. The series is titled, It's All About Grace. Well, some people aren't aware, but Discover the Word is just part of what we do here at Our Daily Bread Ministries. We also publish the Our Daily Bread devotional that goes out to tens of millions of people around the world. We provide free online classes through Our Daily Bread Christian University, and we provide Christian books and music through Our Daily Bread Publishing, and that's just to name a few. And all of these ministry outreaches and the lives that are being touched through them are a testament to God's faithfulness to Our Daily Bread Ministries over the years. And God provides for us financially through the generous giving of friends like you. He's been doing that for 80 years now. And so today I'd like to invite you to support Discover the Word in a new kind of way by becoming a monthly partner. As a monthly partner, you give an automatic gift each month in the amount that you choose. And over the course of 12 months, then, your investment will help us to bring the life-changing wisdom of the Bible to even more people around the world. You can sign up to become a monthly partner by going online to our website at discovertheword.org and clicking on the Donate button. Or you can give us a call at our toll-free number, which is 1-800-214-1650. 1-800-214-1650. All right, well, I'm Brian Heading. Glad you could join us today. Our Thursday program tomorrow has Mart and Bill and Elisa and Daniel talking about the difference between living under the law and living under grace, and why one is far superior to the other. Another part of our study, it's all about grace, tomorrow here on Discover the Word.
Today may change your life. Let's talk about it on Key Life.
Key Life is a radio program for struggling believers sick of phony religion and pious cliches. Our host and teacher is seminary professor Steve Brown. He teaches that radical freedom leads to infectious joy and surprising faithfulness.
Thanks, Matthew. You have your Bible open to the 19th chapter of John, and we're talking about the people who are around the crucifixion of Jesus. the most important event in the history, well, that and the resurrection in the history of the world. And we're looking at people's reaction to it, and we're seeing some things that are really important. And for the last couple of days, we've been talking about the thieves on the cross. You know, they were just common, ordinary thieves, and all of a sudden, they find themselves at the center of the most important event in history. And it happens that way. I mean, there's no trumpet. There's no voice from heaven that warns you. There's nothing to say, get ready, it's coming. It just happens. And so our prayer each morning needs to be, Lord, I'm going to do normal stuff today, but if something big's going to happen, make me sensitive and keep me faithful to you. And then yesterday we talked about Hesed, the Hebrew word that Michael Card has written a book about, and how it was expressed. He defines that word as when a person from whom I have a right to expect nothing gives me everything. That's grace. That's what the Christian faith is all about. You have, listen to me, and it's important, you have nothing to bring to God whereby you might commend yourself in his presence. That's true. And you say, no, it's not. Yes, it is. And if you don't think it is, say, God, show me myself. That's a dangerous prayer, and it's almost always answered with a yes. You have nothing, and I have nothing with which we might bring to God, whereby we might commend ourselves in his presence. And this about the thieves is a perfect example of you and of me. The thief didn't have a thing, and Hesed took place. Grace took place. The Greek word agape took place. A love that was not connected to anything the one who was loved did or said or served or gave. And that's good. That can happen to you when we look at the thieves, going back to what we were originally saying, when all of a sudden the world changes and you didn't even expect it. My brother Ron, and when we get to heaven, I'll introduce you to him. He would have been the governor of North Carolina by now. He was an amazing politician. In fact, he was the district attorney with the highest conviction rate in North Carolina. And he was my best friend, and I still miss him after all these years. He died in his 40s. But one summer, my brother Ron stayed with us. In fact, our mother wanted him to do that because he was getting ready to get married, and our mother, who was very strong, didn't think it was time and wanted to get him away from this lady, which didn't work, by the way, and we love her as much as we loved Ron. But anyway, so he comes to live with us on Cape Cod over the summer, and he got a job as a waiter. Now, my brother was very good at what he did, and he was smart, and he was gifted, and he was bright, but he was not a waiter. and he would spill things all over people. He'd mess up the check, and they kept trying to train him, and they really liked him. And the guy who owned the restaurant called Ron over and said, listen, son, I really like you, and I think you're bright, and I think if we had about 15 years to train you, you maybe could be a waiter, but you just don't have it, and so I'm going to have to let you go. Well, my brother came back to the house having lost the job where he was going to make big bucks in the summer on Cape Cod, and he was laughing about something. And I said, brother, what are you laughing about? You just lost your job. And you know what he said? Steve, the next moment could change my life. The next moment could change my life. And he lived that out that summer, and he got a good job worked at a golf course, and he did quite well. And it really happened. And then when he went back, he got married, and it did change his life. It was a good philosophy. We have a tendency to get bored with life, to just do whatever we're supposed to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. Somebody has defined flying as hours and hours of boredom interrupted with moments of sheer terror. Well, that's what life is. Hours and hours of boredom interrupted with moments of greatness and power and significance. So be sensitive to the people that you love today and tomorrow and the next day. Be aware of what's going on around you when you go to work. Don't just go to work. Ask God to make you open to whatever he has for you that day. The thieves found themselves caught in an event that changed their lives. And their lives weren't that long. A few more minutes, and one would be lost forever, and the other would live forever. So be sensitive today. The lesson of the thieves standing on the hill of Golgotha. You think about that. Amen.
More from Steve tomorrow. We'll save a seat for you. Steve recently spoke with author Robert Wolgemuth about his book, Lies Men Believe and the Truth That Sets Them Free. Take a listen to part of that conversation, then I'll be back to tell you about a very special offer.
Is there a difference between men and women in this area?
Yeah, I think there is. Now, obviously, there are some similarities between the lies that women are tempted to believe and the lies that we men are tempted to believe. In fact, in my bio, it talks about my daddy being a Mennonite pastor. I grew up in a situation, in a setting where you were judged by the color of the car you drove, how you shaved your beard, the color of your clothing, all those things. And grace was not talked about much in my family. Now, gratefully, the Lord really spoke to my daddy toward the end of his life. In fact, R.C. Sproul had a lot to do with this. But you've been a man who I have loved because of the grace that you've extended in your life, and I've been the recipient of that. So my background was rule following, earning your way to the throne. In fact, one of the lies is there are sins that I've committed that I can't be forgiven for. And I think that's a big one, right? That's on the list of 40 lies that we were able to narrow down. But the foundation chapter, and this was a real fun exercise because Nancy talks in her book about deception, about the fact that Eve was deceived. Well, as you know, the Apostle Paul in his letter to Timothy, one of his letters to Timothy, says, and I quote, Eve was deceived, but Adam was not. So, I read that verse. Nancy and I read that verse. We talked about it and said, okay, so what was Adam? How does this work out? Well, most scholars believe that Adam was present for the conversation between Eve and the serpent in the garden. One of the sins that men commit is the sin of passivity. And my guess, and lots of scholars agree, that he just stood there and watched this happen between his wife and Satan. And he determined that he would rather disobey God than displease his wife.
Whoa.
Hey, Robert, you were talking about one of the sins that that men have that's unique, and you see it in the Garden of Eden, is this sin of passivity. And, that reminded me of something that I picked up in seminary, and when I heard this, it blew me away. So Adam was charged with tending and keeping the garden. So tending is like make all the stuff grow and make it nice. But the keep thing was the same deal as the priests and the tabernacle, that they were supposed to guard it, that they were supposed to protect it. And so that guarding of the garden, he failed at that. He let the snake in. He should have never let that happen. So, just what a picture of passivity and not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
That's a great point. In fact, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Lord posted 2 centurions at the entrance after Adam and Eve were gone. So that's what Adam had been doing, and now he's out of the garden. That's powerful. That's really good stuff. Well, it's interesting. Nancy and I have been married 35 months. We celebrate months. But when we were putting our wedding together, she was 57, never married. I was 67, having been married almost 45 years. I said, you know what? When you go to a wedding, the daddy brings the daughter down, the bride down. In my case, it was Nancy's brother because her daddy's been gone for 40 years. And I said, when Mark gets halfway down the aisle, I want him to stop. And I'm going to leave the altar where I was standing next to the pastor, and I'm going to come get her. I'm going to go halfway down the aisle. I'm not going to be standing there passively while she gets all the way down. I'm going to go get her.
That was Robert Wohlgemuth on Steve Brown, etc. So what is that special offer I mentioned? Just this. We'd like to send you a CD of that entire conversation between Steve and Robert for free. Just call 1-800-KEY-LIFE. That's 1-800-539-5433. You can also drop us an email at steve@keylife.org. If you're mailing us, send your request to Key Life Network, P.O. Box 5000, Maitland, Florida, 32794. If you're in Canada, the address is Key Life Canada, P.O. Box 28060, Waterloo, Ontario, N2L 6J8. Just ask for the free CD featuring Robert Wohlgemuth. And if you'd like to help us produce and share free material like this, you can charge a gift on your credit card or include a gift in your envelope. If you can give, we promise to make your donation go a long, long way in spreading the message that God's not mad at you. And if you can't give, well, we'd still like you to have the CD featuring Robert Wohlgemuth. Key Life is a member of ECFA in the States and 4C in Canada. Both of those organizations assure financial accountability so you can be sure we're not wasting your donations. Key Life is a listener-supported production of Key Life Network.